I'm now going to take a few moments to greet a special person. Amanda Stuart is here today, and I'm wanting particularly to introduce her to you because she's a very special person, and not least because she's written this book, which is called The Longest Journey, Finding the True Self. It's a journey that we're all on, I suppose. And so here is one person has taken this upon herself to talk about this long journey. And without me talking any further about it, I'd like her to come forward for me to introduce her to you. Come on, Amanda Stuart, welcome. Come on. Yes. Now, if we get that microphone near to you. So,
right.
welcome.
Like so. Thank you very much.
That's great. What made you want to write this book? It's quite a book, isn't it?
Well, I think it was because when I started counselling, what I noticed was, regardless what brought people along, generally it's anxiety, depressive feelings and relationship difficulties. What lay underneath was invariably childhood difficulties, trauma and adolescent problems. And it just struck me, it was extraordinary that whatever they were struggling with in their 30s, 40s, 50s, a lot of this went back to what they'd experienced very early on. And when I was training, and I'd have to say that I trained at the Cairn Miller, and Coral Brown, Dr. Coral Brown is here today.
That's by the way, that's very, very special that we should mention that you did train within Cairn Miller, and Coral Brown is here to listen to your words of wisdom today.
Well, I listened to hers before. But I was already in my 50s, and I'd been a teacher. I'd noticed as a teacher that so many children were struggling in year 7, year 8, year 9, and it got worse. And so I only taught for 8 years. It wasn't, well, I enjoyed the teaching. I didn't enjoy the administration. And so I decided, somebody said to me, a psychologist friend said to me, what are you going to do now? And I said, I think I want to do what you do. And she said, well, ring the Cairn Miller Institute and study family therapy. And I did. So what happens with nearly all the people, and this is a collection of stories of people's lives, really. I began working after about 5 years. I thought, I'm going to start collecting these stories. And so I would interview people a year or so after they'd finished seeing me. And to find out, why did they come to counselling? What was it that brought them? And then what did they find out? And invariably, what they found out was something totally different. And they were on this path of self-discovery. I mean, I'm listening to the service today, so much of it relates to what's in the book and to what people found out and to the things they needed to deal with. I must add that the people in this book were pretty special and pretty rare because they hung in counselling. A lot of people will come along for 3, 4, maybe 6 visits. But these people really had to see me for quite a long time to undo the hurt and undo the wounding. Now, the other side of this is that, unfortunately, a lot of the wounding is done by parents, but it's not intentional. It's that this is all they know. And I think nowadays, at least, there's parental training, there's so much more help and support, but there wasn't. And so a lot of these young people, they were 20, 30, 40, had very limited input from parents because the parents were struggling and often the grandparents had struggled. So it's the intergenerational thing that what's handed down. I mean, I think parenting is the most important job anyone can ever do, and it's lovely to see the baptism here today. I enjoy that. But there's no training. There's absolutely no training. You learn by how you're parented. I was very saddened that one of my friends read this book. She has 5 children, and afterwards she said, well, I didn't know whether to tell you this or not, but I was very depressed reading this. And I said, I'm really sorry about that. And she said, well, it just made me think I was a terrible mother. And I said, how can you think you're a terrible mother? You've got 5 children who love you and you love. They're all united. They all have parties and meet. How can you say you did a bad job? But I think partly why I wrote it was that I wanted parents to think about this little child and what this little child needs, and that maybe the discipline methods that we were subjected to aren't necessarily the best.
You put on the cover of this book a delightful cover of 2 young children looking out into the ocean, as if looking into the future, which is very symbolic, I thought. But you can see that I've read it and I've put little bits of, look at it all, I put pieces, because these are the questions I was, or at least they were the prompters for me to ask you questions. But I don't need to ask you the questions. You're talking yourself without my prompting, which is really better. I'd like to just hold on to that last piece, though. It's in addition to talking about what happens to the children, the book helps the adult, parents and others, to reflect. I thought the good thing about the book, not the only good thing, but one good thing was that as you read it, it's beautifully written. But that also it's written in a way that makes the adult reflect and say, oh yes, oh yes. And some parts really are quite inspiring, and as you say, some parts really are somewhat very challenging. I can well imagine the mother, your friend, saying just that. But I'd like to read just one little section here to move it slightly. It says, it led me to an appreciation of the way our physical body, through illness and disease, reflects our emotional life. I've also come to recognise that our bodies store the memory of all experience, as well as our emotional response to that experience. That's very, very profound. And many of the people here have heard me say such things many times before, but in that regard, that makes this book very good. So how long did it take to write?
Well, it took 6 years in all. The first probably year or 2 years was very easy. I just dashed it off. And I thought, oh, this is a breeze. I'm nearly finished this book. And then when I read it again, I thought, I haven't said what I really need to say. I haven't said the tough stuff and the hard stuff. I haven't talked about sexual abuse. I haven't talked about suicide. And so I just stopped writing because I didn't know if I could do it. And I think I mentioned to you that along the way, whenever it got really hard, I was helped. Something happened, somebody spoke to me, somebody offered support. And what happened this particular time was that I was working in rooms in Port Melbourne, and a girl I didn't know very well, who was a healer of some sort, was standing there, and we just started chatting. She was holding a book, and she said, oh, do you want to borrow this? And she handed me a book by Alice Miller.
Alice Miller?
Yes.
Alice Miller is also very much within this ethos, and we've talked about here before, but go ahead.
Well, it was such a tough book. It was a much tougher book than I wanted to write, but it said all the hard things. It said them really bluntly, and yes, tough. And so I read it from cover to cover, and I thought, I can do this. I just have to start the beginning again. And luckily I hadn't lost because for 2 years I didn't write anything in the middle. I hadn't lost it. I still had the same computer, opened it up again, and I rewrote the first half pretty much.
A lot of the writing too is not only about just what happened, but you also probe, as it were, or talk about what's underneath, which I think is a very major contribution to the discussion of what therapists, as you are an experienced therapist, what therapists really do or should do. Not only talk about things on the surface, how to solve your problem and get on with things, but we need to listen to what's hidden, the memories, the dreams, the background story that is not talked about. The other good thing too that you brought out here was a little bit, well, not just a little bit, but quite a lot about yourself.
I did.
Yes, and I thought that's something that many therapists don't do.
No, well, I was corrected by one. I asked somebody to review it, and he didn't approve at all of my doing that. He said that he thought it was too brave.
Well, some therapists prefer not to talk about themselves because just as well. Me, you wrote here, for me the process of counselling was life-changing. I actually believe the term life-saving to be no exaggeration. What? This is a client.
Yes, yes.
You wrote it.
Yeah, I wrote it.
Yes.
I wrote it. Yeah.
Yes. What more could anyone want from life than to discover the answer to the question, who am I? So who are you? Don't answer that question. Therapists can go so far to answer questions, but that's far enough.
In terms of dreams, I was going to say that I follow my dreams very carefully and have done for about 20 years. I write them down and I think about what they're trying to tell me. And part of why this book got written was because I had a dream, and it was a blank piece of paper, and at the top of the paper was written the word books. And I woke up and thought, my goodness, that's a direction, I can't forget that. And the first that I knew was that I'd been asked to contribute to a book called 10 Pound Poms, which I hadn't done. I delayed because it was a hard story to write about coming here and leaving England. And but I did it. I rang him and I said, if it's not too late, I'd like to do this. And then the next morning, I woke up, and it wasn't in the dream, but I woke up and I knew that this was the book I wanted to write, and I pretty much had the chapter headings in my mind, and they haven't changed an awful lot.
Isn't that something? This book is as I said, it really is beautifully written, easy to read. There are comments here from very distinguished people from overseas, from New York and also locally. In fact, Dr. Cora Brown here this morning, she wrote, it's written on the cover, the longest journey, this book, takes the reader into the intimate space of counselling and psychotherapy. The author's clients describe how their lives were explored, pain experienced, insights gained, and the way new and more positive pathways became possible in their lives. Anyone considering therapy will find this book beneficial, as will psychologists, psychotherapists, and social workers. But so will we all as you read it. I want to commend it very, very warmly and with great integrity. You can buy a copy of it in the hall today. It's selling at $25, beautifully presented, and I commend it to you. $5. Oh, yes, that's very good. $5 of that. She's very generously and kindly is donating $5 of that. Every book that's bought will go to our Big Tent project, which is focused towards young children at kindergarten who have been seriously damaged in their lives already at the age of 4.5. And we're trying to ensure that we can do something to open up new avenues and new potential for their lives. So I thank you for this moment today and for your writing of this book, and I hope that you'll all make sure you take a copy. Remember, Christmas is not far away. And I think it's good. I always like to write a book sometime just before Christmas because you might sell 4 or 5 copies, but this book, more than 4 or 5 copies. So would you thank Amanda Stuart for being my guest, our guest here today? Thank you.